Hi everyone, thank you very much for joining us once again as we look at the various impacts on businesses relating to coronavirus. So the aim of this session is we'll keep it fairly punchy and go through this fairly quickly, but this is an update on anything that's changed since Monday when we did the last one. We're going to look at questions that businesses have been firing into us to see whether we can get advice and guidance on that. And then we're going to focus on what is probably quite a sensitive topic, but it's come up an awful lot this week, which is now the time to actually shut down either temporarily or permanently the operations of my business, and how do I go about doing that? So those are the topics we very much want to look at. We can have a good game of furlough bingo as we go through this and see how many times we mentioned that new word in the English dictionary that we're all talking about all the time. And so without further ado, I want to go through all of those points. Now, in terms of who's on the call today, we've got the usual team from BDO. So myself, Mark Sykes, we've got Liam O'Doherty, we've got Kerry Bailey. We've also got other colleagues from BDO, and also we're joined by Caroline Prosser from Hill Dickinson, who is an employment lawyer, and also we've got Paul Sherpo from the Liverpool Chamber of Commerce, who has been fielding a whole raft of questions from businesses out there. We've also been talking to lots of people in the meantime and have lots of input from other people to make sure that we've done all we can to make sure we're keeping this current and up to date. So a big thank you to all of you for joining us. And I just want to throw in one major caveat at the start. This is changing on a daily basis. We're getting more and more information all the time. So this is at 9 o'clock on 27th of March. This could well have changed by the time we get between now and we actually publish this. So please be careful around that. And also, we don't know the details of any specific business that might be listening to this. So this is not a substitute for taking proper legal or financial advice. So if you need help, by all means, get in touch with any of us. But do make sure that you take proper advice so your own situation is properly understood. So without further ado, let's get into some of these topics. Let's look at the government measures, and this is just an update on what we've seen this week. So job retention scheme, brilliant measure in terms of focus. First of all, the focus has been on the health of people, but the second focus has been on keeping people paid and in employment and avoiding unnecessary job losses. So I think we would all massively applaud the efforts around this. And in terms of the headlines, 80% of salary being covered for staff, up to 3 months at the moment, but more measures may be taken. And then introduce this new word, but the staff have to be furloughed. And then we get into a million questions. So, Caroline, I'm going to look to you on this one. I've got some questions here. So can I fire them at you from businesses?
Yep.
Okay. So first question, can you work when you are furloughed?
No, you are not able to work when you're furloughed, although you are able to take part in the government voluntary scheme.
Okay, so it's the government's voluntary scheme's okay, but it's not any kind of maybe volunteering to do some work to help your employer or something like that.
No, you're not allowed to do anything which will create help the business of the employer. So any kind of voluntary scheme outside of that's fine.
Okay, and very quickly, Paul, when we spoke about this before, I think you said this was one of the points that had come up and people were lobbying at the moment on this one. Is that correct in terms of?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, there's a great deal of effort going in this week to see whether elements of this particular scheme could be made more flexible. At the moment, as Caroline has said, it's very much of an all or nothing. So your staff don't work, therefore they're entitled to support from this scheme. What some of the arguments that were being made in the capital earlier in the week was: is there a way of finding some half measures where there's a partial furloughing, or some of the scheme is tied in with some elements of reduced hours and reduced capacity, given for example, in certain industries there's a requirement for a minimum amount of delivery. So, for example, the airport, for example, has a statutory obligation to provide a minimum level of service for its own security and ongoing activity. But they're in a position where effectively they can't have individuals working reduced hours to fulfil those obligations and still benefit from this particular scheme. So there was some of those particular elements of the scheme that were being discussed earlier in the week. Now, unfortunately, there hasn't been a great deal of flexibility in the scheme as it's been updated overnight. So we're a little bit disappointed with that. albeit recognising that there's so much going on at the moment that I think everyone has to be fairly grateful for what they do have access to.
Yeah,
but it would have been good to have had a bit more flexibility in there.
There is something that might help.
Yeah. Okay.
In terms of, although you can't have, you're either short-time working or you're on furlough. First of all, you can take people off short-time working and put them on furlough. But if you're not sure, or you have shifts of workers, or you're not sure who's going to get ill, there's nothing that says you cannot rotate the furlough. So as long as it's no more than, they have at least 3 weeks on furlough, you could have people on furlough, then off, then on furlough. So that might be something they could consider.
Okay, so we're going to come on to that question because that was asked. So let's just canter through a couple of the other questions first. Can you force staff to be furloughed?
You can't force staff because it's a change of contract. However, it's not a difficulty in practice because, first of all, the alternative is redundancy or layoff. And secondly, if they don't agree, so what we're doing with our clients is we're saying send out a letter saying, do you agree? And they come back and say, yes, we agree. And if they don't agree, then we have a brief consultation with them, which is very brief, which ends in you terminating and then re-engaging them on furlough. So you will get to that point anyway.
Okay, but there is a process to go through and take legal advice on that. And can you furlough some staff? I mean, it sounds like you can, but it's that discrimination point. Why did you furlough X and you didn't furlough Y? So are there concerns around that, or is that it's fairly straightforward process to say to someone, you've been selected for furloughing?
Furloughing of some staff, I would look on it very much as how you would in a restructure or redundancy. So some staff will be needed to work, and some staff will be those who you won't need to work. And that's all about business reason. When it comes to selecting people, for example, if you need 5 of a certain role and you've got 8, I would advise to carry out some kind of selection process as you would in a redundancy. But I believe there's nothing in the rules that doesn't say you can't prioritise those vulnerable workers for furlough or those over 70.
Okay, so going to the point I think you were touching on before, can you put people on and off the scheme? So, next 2 weeks is going to be a bit quiet. I'd like to furlough people, but then in 2 weeks' time, I know I've got kind of month-end stuff, so I'm going to unfurlough them and then I'm going to furlough them again. Is that doable?
It's not banned. It does say as long as they're on for 3 weeks, and I think the key
over
thing
3 weeks over a month or over the
just 3 weeks in a row.
Okay.
So I think the key thing with this is it's there to protect businesses, and some businesses, we don't know what's going to happen in 3 weeks is the point. I mean, I think we've got a fairly good idea we're still going to be in difficulties, but it is going to fluctuate, and some businesses are going to be in a position where their business upturns and then it goes off again. So I can't see an issue with that as the guidance is drafted currently.
Okay, and in terms of that rotation point, and that's slightly different. So just how did that work? What was the point on that?
I believe this is a lot of clients were concerned about what they'd do if they furloughed some employees and then those and that kept some working, and then those working got sick and they were actually then left, without enough employees. So you can use it for that purpose. You could also use it if you wanted to. If you generally have shifts anyway, and you wanted to perhaps put some kind of shift working, a bit like at the moment, the schools have teachers working on 1 week in 3. Yeah. So I can't foresee that being a problem unless they say otherwise. That sounds like an option.
Is off sick. Can they then move to being furloughed?
Yes, if those employees are eligible for furlough anyway, then they can be placed on furlough and have the sick pay converted to furlough, in which case the employer would get the 80% back. The only way I could foresee that you could not do this is if a sick employee was not eligible to be furloughed in any event, because the furlough is about the roles that are needed, whereas the sick pay is about the personal position of the employee. So if that employee was not due to be furloughed because they were still essential to the business and then they went off sick, you'd have to pay them sick pay rather than convert it to furlough.
So this is like the comment you made earlier on about it's like the redundancy process. We're looking at the roles of the individuals and working out if those are needed, and then based on that, if the individual, whether they are sick or not sick, if the role as a result of the coronavirus situation is not currently needed, then you can furlough that individual with their consent. Is that right, Caroline?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, and Lee and Nick, just in terms of the tax side of things on this, national insurance, etc., what's the position on that?
It's fairly clear in the guidance. The intention is that the additional costs normally associated with employing people, i.e. the employer's national insurance and employer's minimum auto-enrolment pension contributions, will be an additional part of the grant, so the businesses can get funding for that. And given that's a multiplier of the salary paid, it shouldn't, in theory, cost them any additional costs beyond the grant payment.
Okay.
I think it's if there's a top-up payment, it's that those costs aren't sort of covered. It's that scenario, isn't it, Nick?
Yes.
Yeah. And in terms of whether the person is long-term sick, it's just short-term sickness and all of that, I kind of infer from that discussion there that it's irrelevant. It's actually probably better to kind of ignore that piece because fundamentally you are trying to make a decision based on the role. Is that right?
Correct, yeah.
Oh, that's great. Okay, now maternity, I'm going to guess you're going to tell me it's the same then. So even if someone was due to go on maternity in 3 months' time or within the next 3 months, it's always quite hard to understand all the maternity rules anyhow, but what's the situation there? Is can someone due to go on maternity be furloughed, and does that interact with the maternity pay, and any help on that?
A person about to go on maternity can be furloughed. However, the worker qualifies for their maternity pay on the 15th week before the due date. So if they've reached that point, then they will be on the full pay for the maternity. The maternity will be based on their usual wage as opposed to the furlough wage.
Okay, so the 80% doesn't impact on the kind of maternity terms and the payments that would need to be made for someone that's going on maternity leave.
Certainly once they've reached this qualifying point.
Okay.
Yes.
So sorry, so if they're furloughed before the qualifying point and therefore being paid 80% of the salary if the employer's not topping up, could that impact on the amount of maternity pay they receive, or is it ignored and we look at the full salary, or is that something we need to?
It's not clear,
Okay.
but I would imagine it's the same as it would be in any other type of scenario like this, whereby that if they haven't qualified for the maternity, when they qualify, that's the point they qualify, and it's for that pay. So
Yeah.
if they're before that point, I would imagine that it would be at the furlough wage. But there's a few things they haven't quite clarified that clients are a little bit confused over, such as medical suspension for pregnancy, which is on full pay, as opposed to sick pay. And there's quite a few things we just need to get a bit more clarification about.
So I think the furloughing conversation's going to carry on for some time, isn't it? So
yeah, and I know a lot of my clients are just choosing to do maternity based on their usual wage anyway, as a choice, mainly because if they're only offering statutory maternity pay, although the government are saying that if you offer contractual over and above the statutory, then that can count as wages for the purposes of furlough for claiming back.
okay, this is complex stuff, isn't it? So all right, very quickly rattle through the remaining questions I've been fired in. So can I go back to staff who have already been laid off and actually say I didn't mean to lay them off, and had I known this I would have furloughed them? So can I go back and correct my position and say, sorry, I told you a few weeks ago that you've been laid off, but actually I'm not going to do that now, I'm going to furlough you because this has now come in?
You can, as long as it was after the 28th of February. So anybody that a lot of the decisions will have been made in March, because that's when we realised the extent of the problem. And so those employees that you made any decisions such as putting them on short time working, whether it's agreed or consulted over or made redundant, those people you will be able to re-employ and then get reimbursed back towards the 1st of March.
Oh, that's really helpful. Okay, and then at the end of 3 months, and let's assume that no further funding comes forward, and let's assume that the situation still carries on, has my furloughing impacted any of the decisions that I would need to make then? So if I've now got to the point, look, I'm going to have to lay you off because things didn't improve for the business and we've been hit too hard, has furloughing messed anything up in terms of the process I need to follow, or is it just back normal process and carry on as before?
Yeah, it would be the normal process, and that's what I've been trying to say to clients is because we don't know what's going to happen. At present, if you were to make a redundancy and there was a person who had over 2 years service, then they'd probably say it was unfair because there is this furlough scheme. However, when you get to a point where there's no furlough scheme, that wouldn't be one of the positions they could take.
Yeah.
So you would be in the normal position as if there wasn't any furlough scheme at the end of the scheme if they wanted to then
Okay,
get
but
redundancy.
we don't know if it might be extended anyhow. That's one of those questions.
I would be surprised if it wasn't extended. I think that they've only guaranteed it at the moment to the 31st of May.
Yeah.
However, I would envisage that if we're still in this position, they would seek to extend.
Yeah. Directors, can you furlough a director?
You can furlough a director and claim anything that they get through the PAYE.
Mm-hmm.
So this would not count for dividends
Yeah.
because they're not through the PAYE.
But
So
salary piece is
it's the salary piece, and I think anybody who earns most of their wages through dividends would come under the self-employed category.
okay. Last couple of questions. What do I actually need to do to furlough someone? Do I need to? Does it go through my real-time information records? Do I need to have something documented to help anyone on what I need to do?
First thing you need to do is to consider which of the employees you need to furlough, and then you need to contact them to get their consent to be furloughed, and if they don't consent, then you consult with them. Again, there are ways of doing this quicker than usual given the circumstances.
Okay.
And after you have your list of employees, there is then a list on the government site of the other details you'll need, such as their wages, the details of the pay, etc. The HMRC is not ready at the moment, but what we're doing for clients is having all of the documentation ready so that as soon as the scheme's up and running, which they believe it'll be by the end of April to pay, they're ready to go. So another thing we can do if you've got employees who are on weekly wages, we're consulting to change people to monthly wage because sometimes that can cause quite a cash flow issue when the employee is not going to get the money back till the end of April.
Yeah. Right. I feel we've
More
done
practical steps.
Yeah, I feel we've done a lot on furloughing there. And so just very quickly to open up to anyone else, is there any last comments anyone wants to make, things that we've not touched on that are coming up as topics that businesses are needing to know? So open up to anyone to throw anything in on that one.
Mark,
Yeah,
I think the critical thing from this scheme is on cash flow. Every input from an organisation that we've had in the past week has been around the need for cash, both in terms of influx but also limiting outflow as well. So again, we're still looking at another month to 6 weeks of businesses having to cash flow this. Now, whether that can be mitigated by the interruption loan to some extent, I'm not entirely sure. But I think it's really important that within that process, it becomes very, very clear at what point businesses should be putting their claim in and what the turnaround time will be so that they can adequately cash flow. And I think that more than anything else, that's a critical issue that needs to be addressed through this.
There's still gaps there, aren't there? Sorry, was that you, Liam? That was just...
Yeah, Mark, I think the other thing to say, I think it's really important that everybody sort of uses this scheme for the purposes that's intended. And I think, if we fast forward to, when we've come out of this, I think people who've sought to abuse it will probably be judged quite harshly. So I think it is important to use it responsibly.
Yeah, I think it's a big step. It's the right thing to have done, and I think everyone's supportive of it. Exactly as you say, Liam. I think if it gets abused, well, one, is that going to make it less likely they'll extend it, and two, who's going to be frowning on this at the end? Quite a few points then, just to canter through. Business interruption loans. Just very quickly on that. I think kind of the noise I'm hearing is experience has not been great. Long waiting times, can't get through to the banks. Some banks saying it's our existing customers only. The amount they're willing to give is minimal. Quite onerous credit processes. Personal guarantees coming up as a big one. So it's the scheme says if it's below £250,000, don't need the personal guarantees, but the banks are putting personal guarantees in because for their lending purposes they require it. A long credit process. So what I've heard is that at the moment businesses are feeling quite disgruntled with the scheme and saying it's not doing what it needs to. I don't know any views from the team in terms of what they're seeing and hearing or comments around that. Silence on that one. I mean, I did.
No, Mark, sorry, I was muted for a second. No, very much so.
Right.
What you've described is absolutely spot on. We've had 6, maybe 7 case studies of businesses actually telling us that regardless of what level of finance they've requested, they've been asked for a personal guarantee. So it's that the £250,000 threshold is well above what the banks are looking at the moment in terms of the requirement for a PG.
Yeah, and I was talking to British Business Bank, and the comment back from them is that the banks have had conversations and been told to refocus their efforts. So it probably is worth saying if you've talked initially and not quite got the response, it might be worth just going back in again and having the conversation again and making the point to them that isn't that they should be supporting this time. And you might find that messaging's flowing through to mean that they're being more receptive to this now as a means of support. And don't forget, there are a raft of other lending options out there which are still valid and can still be sought. So as you have those conversations, don't feel limited to conventional debt products that they may be talking about. There may be lots of other lenders out there willing to give alternative forms of funding and support. So please don't forget, this isn't the only answer to get the funding businesses need. Corporate financing facility, just briefly touch on that, and that's just to say, look, last time we talked about this, the idea is this to cover off everything above the 45 million turnover threshold for the business interruption loans? The answer is no, actually, it isn't doing that. It's businesses that are capable of issuing paper debt to the bank to cover their short-term funding. So there is a gap out there for businesses and groups as well that don't meet the SME criteria. That are over the £45 million turnover threshold. But again, I believe that's a point of lobbying to say this is a gap that does need to be addressed and looked at quickly. So hopefully something coming through on that. VAT deferrals, I'm not aware of anything major changing on that one, but Richard, from your side or Craig, in terms of what you're seeing, businesses getting support around time to pay as well as VAT, how's it going out there?
Shall I cover off the VAT stuff first, Craig? We got a little bit of extra guidance yesterday afternoon. There are still lots of areas of interpretation around how the VAT deferral works. What we've had from HMRC now is they've definitively said if you pay by direct debit, cancel that. So we're strongly recommending that people do that as soon as they can. We now know as well that the deferral applies to all UK VAT registered businesses with some very minor exceptions. And lastly, the other update that came through yesterday from HMRC is that they've clarified that anything that is deferred now is payable on the 31st of March 2021.
Okay.
So the VAT payments you should be making now are deferred until the 31st of March 2021. There are still a few open questions on this one and different interpretations of different areas, such as how you manage payment account and how you manage import VAT. So if people are uncertain, what we are recommending they do is that they set out a position, check with someone if it's reasonable, and if possible, communicate that to HMRC so that they can be seen to have taken reasonable care in this area if they get challenged in the future.
Yeah, and so that would suggest that you're better getting your invoices out anyhow to get cash collection in for yourself. But if it's in this period then and goes on the next VAT return, then that deferral's a long way out, isn't it? So that would seem to make sense to get your invoices raised sooner.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely. The sooner you can do it, the better. If you put all of the output VAT liability that you owe on the next return, chances are it will get deferred until March 2021.
Yeah.
If you leave it until the next VAT period after that, you're going to have to pay it at some point this year. So definitely better trying to do all of your billing and accelerate cash collections as quickly as you can from there.
But that's good management anyhow. So, okay, and Craig, time to pay updates on that or experience?
Yeah, so similar to as it was on Monday, Mark, HMRC is still engaging in conversations with time to pay. Our experience this week is that businesses are, with large success, getting deferrals of up to 3 months on the majority of tax liabilities that they have. The only caveat we would say is that in terms of contacting the helpline, the wait time is now in and around 2 hours plus. So it takes a little bit of patience, but the revenue is still engaging.
Hey,
so
one thing we've learned about this is get patient in terms of telephone queues. I think 2 hours is a lot quicker than Ocado at the moment. So, that's and you're more likely to get a result at the end as well. So
yeah, no, absolutely.
Persevere. Great. The last topic then, which was the announcement yesterday, self-employed workers. Again, it seems like actually a very generous proposition there, stepping from the government. But Nick, probably one for you on this one. Any kind of insight onto that one in terms of it? So headline was 80% of the average profits of the past 3 years, and basically would cover 3 months at the moment, paying 80% of the up to a maximum of 2,500. It seems to mirror the job retention scheme for self-employed workers. But from your side, anything on that?
I don't think there's a great deal more to add to that, Mark, in fairness. What's interesting, it talks about the trading profits being less than £50,000 as either of a measure, one being the last 3 years on average, up to the 18-19 tax year, or the 18-19 tax year on its own, if that in itself is less than £50,000. But the other key point there is that it constitutes more than 50% of the self-employed individual's income. So they can have other source of income, but it mustn't exceed 50%. So I think when you take into account the other measures that self-employed people can take advantage of, such as deferring their 31 July payments on account under self-assessment until January next year, and also the VAT deferrals that Richard spoke about, there are quite a lot of things which should be able to help people who are self-employed in the immediate term. In terms of mechanics, HMRC have said that they will base information on the 18-19 submitted tax return, and have generously allowed people who have not submitted their tax return for 18-19 to do so by the 23rd of April.
Yeah.
So 30 days from yesterday. Well, no, wouldn't be, would it? But anyway, so giving people a chance to get their tax fares up to date. And the other point that's referenced in the guidance is that the other conditions are already mentioned, plus the fact they believe their profits have been impaired by the COVID-19.
Yeah, so I mean, there is a little bit here that I was slightly bemused about, which was, so job retention scheme, the idea is you stop work, you're furloughed, and then this payment kicks in. Self-employed workers, it doesn't quite work that way sometimes. I might still be working, I'm just not working as much. I might be getting half my income, so I haven't lost all my profits, I've just lost half of my profits. But it seems, the headline seems to be, it's a flat amount that's paid. It's this 8% times this calculation, which is historic, being paid across as a grant. But I was trawling through the government guidance, and just towards the end it says, once you've done your claim, we'll be in touch to let you know how much grant you get. So I don't know if we know, but any insights? Is it just going to be a fixed amount based on the calculation, or are they going to sit there and say, hang on a sec, your loss is only half of that because you're still doing some activity, therefore your grant is reduced and it tops you up, or something like that? Does anyone have any insight, or is it just going to be a lump sum, or are we waiting to find out more?
I'm afraid I can't anything else to what you said, Mark, at the moment.
Yeah, there's not a lot, is there, in terms of there's the headline and there is the intent, which I think is all good. And I think it's just that, I suppose it's going to be another furlough, isn't it? We're going to be working it out. Okay. Okay, so very quickly, right-hand side, this is just a very quick. Other things that businesses need to just watch out for: insurance. Don't invalidate your insurance policies by the actions you take now in a hurry. So check all your insurances and make sure you are looking at those. Employee matters. You've still got all your employment law. I mean, one that I keep thinking about is all these home workers. Historically, you probably would have done a workplace assessment. You can't do that now. You can't send someone out to do a workplace assessment. So just watching out for other HR type matters that might still be latent and out there, and making sure as an employer you're talking it through and taking advice on that. Don't forget your existing bank and borrowing facilities will have covenants and will have requirements, so have a look at those, and if you're going to have problems, then engage with your bank or take advice. Rent is coming up, so a few businesses have been asking. I don't actually pay rates myself. My landlord does that because I'm in a shared space, a shared facility of some kind. So I'm kind of a bit confused because they're surely going to get all of these grants for rateable value of the premises. What do I get? I'm still having to pay my rent. So has that come up at all anywhere, or has anyone heard anything on that?
Only rhetorically, Mark, at this stage. There's definitely an issue brewing there. It's being discussed between the British Chambers of Commerce, policy groups, and they're trying to determine the best course of action for the individuals, businesses that you touched upon there. Conversation with the landlord would seem the obvious first step, but of course that's increasingly challenging in these times. So I think it's a case of waiting for more details and making sure that you go in forearmed with the knowledge that you need to have a robust conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. I saw something about this the other day saying that the intention is that the same protection for all personal individuals in terms of rent is meant to be afforded to the business as well. So they're meant to be getting protection that they can't be evicted if they don't pay their rent in the next 3 months. So I think the intention is that the legal protection is in there. But again, when I was reading that, it was saying exactly what you said, Paul, that talk to your landlord, talk it through. It's not in the landlord's interest to just lose the tenant and have a bad debt. It'd be better off to have a conversation about that holiday period to just give a bit more affordability. So probably conversation, but I think the intent is that there is legal protection for the tenant. But,
and Mark, it's Liam, and we are seeing in practice, from a landlord perspective, a number of tenants coming forward and sort of brokering those discussions.
Great.
Mark, it's Kerry here. There is legislation that's been created that provides a moratorium on the forfeiture. So you can defer your rent for 3 months and the landlord can't forfeit, so he can't end your lease. However, if your premises remain open, then he does have other rights, so he could still potentially distrain with bailiffs if your doors were open.
Okay, so there's your warning. Talk to your landlord and try and do it in an amicable way in the first place. So thank you, Kerry. And health and safety, yeah. So just and this one's coming up and leads to the next question, because some businesses are saying, look, I only operate with, say, 10 people. I've got a few people going off with self-isolation and those kind of issues. And as a result, I'm kind of not able to operate my business. So a few people not coming in is meaning I can't safely operate what I'm doing. So it's starting to accelerate conversations about, do I just need to shut shop for a few months? And that's tricky because that could impact on the things like the customer relationships. It could impact on the ratings on things like Amazon and so forth. So I think, Kerry, that's gonna. I'm basically throwing it over to you now. The question is, do I need to shut up shop? So the pressures are coming on me. I'm thinking of doing it. What is it I need to think about if I'm actually deciding I might need to close either my factory or my premises or my shops and things like that? What are the topics that come up? Because you deal with this a lot, Kerry, don't you, in terms of from a recovery and insolvency point of view, just seeing actually what has to take place. So any thoughts and insights on that?
Yeah, so there's two aspects to it, really. There's the actually making the decision as to whether mothballing your business is the right thing to do, and then there's actually implementing it. So in terms of obviously making the decision to do it, you need to have exhausted all of the avenues that we've talked about in terms of what measures have been announced by government that can offer you some financial support, talking to your existing lenders and seeing what else is out there. speaking to your landlord, taking advantage of the rent and the rates, holidays, deferring all your tax and your PAYE. Assuming that you have done all of those things, your starting point is then looking at what your cash flow now looks like once you have implemented all of those challenges, and see what you can do there. One thing that we would absolutely stress, and has been said a number of times, is that before you do anything with regard to your employees, we would strongly suggest that you get your contracts reviewed by an employment lawyer, just so that you don't fall foul of something that comes back to bite you in due course. Plus, the world, we don't know what the world will look like in 3 months or when we're going to come out of this process. So whatever decision you make now needs to be something that is capable of being reviewed almost on a weekly or certainly a monthly basis, because the position will change again. So assuming that you've done all those things, one of the things that we're seeing a lot with the people we're talking to who are contemplating mothballing is they have approached their existing lenders. They've looked at funding that's available. Some of them haven't managed to secure it, so the decision's almost been made for them. But a few people we've talked to have actually been offered the lending, but they have a nervousness about taking it because of the additional security position, the additional debt that they're taking on, and the requirement for additional personal guarantees. And trying to leverage up your business at a time when you don't know what the future is going to hold is quite a big step to take. So assuming you've made your decision to mothball, the first thing that you need to do is consult with your lawyer to review, at the very least, your contracts with your customers, your contracts with your suppliers, and very, very importantly, your employment contracts. And then you do a full assessment of all your assets and your liabilities. You work out what the implications are and what might happen to the values of those assets, and what's the requirement to keep those assets functioning and insured, and that they're not going to go down in value in any way. In particular, you need to have a very good look at your stock asset, and you need to consider, with regard to your supply chain issues, what can you do legally? Are there any clauses in there that you can be very quickly triggering to stop goods coming in? You may have goods on the water. You may have goods out at customer sites that are yours that are going to perish. So it's understanding what you can do with the stock. Do you have reservation of title clauses? Can you vary your payment terms? Because all of this, whilst you're mothballing your business, with an awful lot of it, all you're doing is pushing that cash flow further out.
Yeah, and Kerry, one point that came up this week with some businesses was it might be that you're shutting your location, but you might be able to move stock to a fulfillment business, and therefore they might be able to carry on supplying your customers, assuming that these are finished goods, but they might be able to continue the supply to customers without interrupting the so you won't upset your customer side of things, but actually behind the scenes, the actual factory itself could effectively be closed down or go through the mothballing process. So I assume people need to think a little bit laterally as well through those different elements and think about, could you actually carry on certain activities without needing the base operations?
They do. They absolutely do need to see if there are any sensible other options available to them to keep the business functioning in some form. But if they are going for a full mothball process, they need to start with that cash flow and think, a lot of this lending that I'm taking is, needs to be paid back at some point in the future. And you need to work out how you're going to do that. And you need to look at the implications of, in terms of having the discussions with the lenders, is taking the additional lending on the right thing to do? Is taking the grant funding on the right thing to do? And the key thing is obviously the discussions with your customers and your supply chain and your employees, and making sure that you can resurrect this on the other side, assuming that's what you're going to do.
Yeah.
The other obvious thing is that this is also an opportunity for people who need to think about whether they should be reshaping their business in some way as well. Because whilst you go into a mothball situation, and you have to deal with your workforce and leases and various premises. We're seeing an awful lot of retail businesses who are being forced to close, but when they reopen on the other side, they're going to look like very, very different businesses, and they're going to take advantage of things like CBAs and alternative procedures that are there to enable them to restructure the business.
Yeah, I suppose this is one thing that I think we're all seeing is that one other aspect of this situation is we're all revisiting how we work, how we operate, how we think, and so therefore bits of your business may no longer be suitable for post-coronavirus situation, and actually it might just accelerate some of those decisions you've been sat on a little bit too long and just say, look, let's just bite the bullet and get on with sorting some of this out. So actually for a lot of people, don't just use it as a temporary park and then reopen in a few months time hopefully, but use it as a chance to say, look, some of these bits of the business were actually slowing me down and dragging the business. It's a time to rethink and explore some of those. So I think it's such a big topic. It's consult, talk, talk to other people around you, and before you press the button, make sure you've considered the consequences of pressing that button.
Yeah, Mark, it's Liam. I think that's exactly right. I mean, it's all about the cash flows, and there are lots of sort of complex factors that will build those cash flows. So it's important you've got a proper understanding. Tax will be one of them, but a very small part, I think, and secondary to the commercial aspects.
And I think a lot of SME businesses out there, they don't have. You can't really go and talk to the staff about what you're thinking of doing, and they don't necessarily have the peer group around them. So talk to your advisors. I've been on lots of calls recently where communities are really coming to the forefront to support businesses as sounding boards. But unfortunately, ultimately the decision will rest with the business owner, with the board. But there are plenty of people around to talk to, so do shout if you need help. Okay, that covers off that, and I'm aware that's quite a lot we've covered there, but it's moving so quick. There's a lot to cover off. If people do have questions, fire them in, and we're going to do more of these and keep building this knowledge base. So send your questions in to anyone, to be honest. I'll put my details there just as a reminder, but I'll take the questions and make sure those are fed in for future sessions. And there are a load of useful links out there. We ourselves are sticking everything into that support hub there, www.bdo.co.uk/COVID-19. So if you go there, that basically has all the information constantly being maintained. But again, watch the relevant ones. So things like the guidance from the British Business Bank on the business loan interruption, that's changing. Keep checking HMRC and all the guidance, it's changing on a daily basis. So a whole load of links there that are useful for you, and do seek advice and support if you need it. So a big thank you, everyone, and thank you to everyone who's been speaking today. I'll close with the same caveat I opened with. We don't know the specific situations of each business, so you do need to take your own personal advice before you take any actions, but hopefully this has just gone through and explained a lot of the complexities. So thank you very much, and hopefully we get through this very quickly. Thank you.